All right, let's talk about copying and pasting a vector from one document to another. By the way, I haven't covered it yet, but if you were to make a new document with Adobe Illustrator and you save it, you'd want to save this as a .ai file or a Adobe Illustrator file. This is the standard or the default format of the Adobe Illustrator. There are other formats you could save this as or convert this to. Not all programs accept AI as a vector format because it is proprietary. So there's two other major ones that you may run across. One is called an EPS or an encapsulated PostScript. Um, for vector programs that are not Adobe, this is probably the major format that they work with. It's a non-proprietary format that other graphic design programs might use. There's also something called a .svg or a scalable vector graphic. This is another popular one, especially for browser-based vector tools, because SVGs are a vector tool that's used to create vectors for online use within browsers. Okay. But anyway, I could, make my document. So if you are working in Illustrator, I would probably recommend using an AI file, but you could see I could save this as an EPS or as an SVG format. Let's talk about copying and pasting. So I have a vector here. If I were to copy this, edit copy and edit paste, this would be an easy way for me to copy and paste an existing vector into my document. You could also duplicate it by highlighting and going to Object. Is there even a duplicate option? Should be. Command or Control D? No, I lied. But an easy way to copy this without having to go through edit, copy, edit, paste is you literally could just highlight and do what's called an option or an alt drag. Hold down the option key on a Mac computer or hold down hold down the alt key on a Windows machine or Windows operating system. And you can see I can kind of quickly copy this. Okay. And I can play around with like the fill and the stroke. Okay. Let's say I wanted to bring in I'm going to try to bring in a vector from another file. I'm going to go open up example cat.ai. So this is a vector file here. I'm going to open this up, edit, copy. Let's go back to our document here, edit, paste. All right, so you can see I can bring this in. Now I'm going to resize it. Maybe I will use the flip option here to flip that graphic over, mirror it. All right, so let's talk about working with the subparts of a vector file, or a vector path, I should say. So I've showed you guys the selection tool, the black arrow, okay? If you highlight a vector with the selection tool, this allows you to highlight the entire vector. I could do things like scale it or rotate it. Vector paths are made, when you have a vector shape or a vector paths are made of two elements or two subparts. That would be the anchor and the segment. Okay. The segment is the actual line. So in this case, if I was to show you the segment, like this is the segment here. This is a segment. And this is a segment. This is a segment. This is a segment. This is a segment. So all five of these are segments. The anchor point is where the anchors are between the segment lines. Okay. So here it's like this is an anchor. This is an anchor. This is an anchor. so on and so on. This is an anchor. Okay. So let's say I wanted to manipulate the subparts of this vector path, not the entire shape, but the subparts, which would be like the anchors. Well, to do that, what you could do is you could use the direct selection arrow. Okay. Also, I sometimes refer to this as the white arrow. And if you click on this, what this allows you to do is if you click on something, see how it's saying, it may be hard to read there, but see in magenta, it's saying anchor. I can click on this and move that anchor around. By moving around the anchor, you move around the segments that are attached to the anchor. So what's really happening here is I have this segment, and they're both attached to that anchor. So if I were to move around that anchor, that also by default moves around those segments. Okay, so I can take these and move them around. Now, when I click on something that has a curve, you might notice that I'm getting these little bars here with little circles on the edges. Those are referred to as Bezier handles. Okay. Bezier handles are what they do as a purpose is they control the intensity and the direction of a curve. Okay. So this is a curve, and this Bezier handle controls the direction of that curve as such, and the intensity. This is very intense curve or very steep curve. This is basically a non-existent curve or a low curve, okay? Why is it called a Bezier handle? The answer to that is the guy who invented it. He was a French engineer because this was originally invented for engineering purposes of car design. His name was Rene Bezier. And when you invent something, you get to name it after yourself. And so that's why it's called Bezier handles. It doesn't mean anything specifically in Latin or anything. So if I have a curve as part of my vector path, I can use I can use the direct selection tool to edit those Bezier handles, which will increase or decrease the intensity of my curves and also the direction of the curves. You might notice that when I work with my Bezier handles here, that they're always kind of in opposite directions. When I move right now, this is going to the left and this is going to the right. If I were to drag it like this is going up and this is going away, right? They're both kind of in the same direction. If you don't want them to sort of mirror each other, what you could do is when you're about to click on one of the handles, hold the Option or the Alt key down. And as I do that, that allows you to break these handles and change or edit just one handle without affecting the other handle. So here, by clicking on this, I have access to these Bezier handles. I'm just going to break them by holding down Option or Alt as I grab this, Option or Alt. And so now you can see that I can play around with different parts here. Okay. Let's talk about um, making basic shapes. Okay, we've learned how to, select vectors, change their fill and stroke, resize them. How can we make our own vectors, or at least some basic vectors? Well, if you go down about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, this is your custom vector tool. What it does is it will make basic shapes based off the current fill and stroke color. So I'm going to set that first. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start with the rectangle tool. And if I click and drag, you can see I make a rectangle with a green fill and a black stroke that goes around my shape. Another way I could do this, if you want to make a nice perfect square, hold down the Shift key and the width and the height will be locked together. Now you might notice that when I make shapes, it always starts from the upper left-hand corner. Usually the way most graphic design tools work is that they always start top down, left to right, and that's because that's the way code is usually read. If you want to not start from the upper left, what I'm going to do is hold down the Option or the Alt key. And you can see now I'm building my shape from the center as opposed to from the upper left-hand corner. If you want to be very, very precise about how you are building this, what you can do is rather than clicking and dragging, if you just click once with the tool, you'll notice that I get this option here that says rectangle. This would give you the exact dimensions in inches or pixels or whatever. So if I wanted to make a vector rectangle that was exactly 100 pixels by, I don't know, 50 pixels, I'm going to hit OK. And then there's my, design that's in that exact size there. Oops. I'm going to click and hold, and that's going to give me additional tools here. I'm going to grab the rounded rectangle tool. The rounded rectangle tool is very similar to the rectangle tool. The difference is when you click and drag, you might notice that I have rounded edges here as opposed to hard 90-degree right angle edges here. If I let go, what I can do is take these circles to increase or decrease the roundedness of my edges. If you use this tool here that kind of pops up, you can actually change the amount for just one. I undid this little checkbox here. This would allow you to change the roundedness for just one of these as opposed to all of them. So if you want to have a very precise, you can see here, I make this kind of design here where it's like I rounded out two corners, but not the other two remain flat. Gives you kind of a unique shape here. Once again, if you be more specific, if I click once as opposed to clicking and dragging, that would give me this pop-up corner where I can do an exact width, an exact height, and then say how much I want the rounded corners to be. The higher the pixel value, the more rounded it will be as such. Next is the ellipse tool. The ellipse tool lets you make a vector circle or ellipse. If I click and drag, I make an ellipse or an oval shape. If you want to make a perfect circle, what I want to do is hold down the Shift key as I draw, and that makes a perfect circle. Once again, you might notice it's starting from the upper left-hand corner. If you want to start from the center, hold down the Option or the Alt key, Option on a Mac keyboard, uh, Alt on a Windows keyboard, and that would allow me to start from the center. Once again, if I were going to, what's the word I'm looking for? If I was going to just build it more specifically, rather than clicking and dragging, I can click once and you set up an exact width here. So if I set this to be, if you want it to be a circle, the width and height should be exactly the same. And you can see here I get a nice, perfect circle being created. Next is the polygon tool. If I click and drag, it makes a multi-sided shape. While you're clicking and dragging before you let go, you can use the up-down arrow keys to add or subtract sides. Once you've actually created it, you can actually adjust that from here. So right here, this option would allow you to round out the edges. Here, this little diamond, this actually lets you add or subtract sides to your shape. So if I click and drag, you can see I can remove sides or increase the number of sides. I can also click once, and this would give me exact values. I can set a radius, which is, radius typically when we talk about this in geometry, a radius is the center of an object, or usually the center of a circle to the edge. So this is how large your object is in terms of its size. The larger the radius, the larger the shape. This is how many sides you would have in your shape. Okay. And finally, we can have stars. I'm going to click and hold and create the star tool here. If I click and drag, I make a star shape. Before you let go, if you use the up down arrow key, you can add or subtract points to your star. I can also, oops, I messed up there. Um, Once you've created a shape, you can use this to increase or decrease how pointy your star is. You can use this option to round out your edges. And I believe this is the same one. Oh, this is the curve, how curvy you want it. And then you can actually see where this little up down blue here. This will allow you to add points to your star if you want. If you're going to do this by hand, if you click once, you have two radiuses. Okay. Let me explain what these radiuses are and what they kind of mean. So the points is kind of obvious. Points are the number of top points. When we talk about the radius, this is the radius 1. Radius 1 is the distance from the center of your star to the top of each point. Okay. So this is radius 1. Radius 2 is from the center to the lowest point of your star. Okay. So the way that this works is that the bigger the distance, or the bigger the value between these two, the pointier your star is. The closer these two values are to each other, the more bulbous your star will be. So let me kind of show that so you can kind of understand. If I were to come in here and I make this 50 pixels and make this 25 pixels, what that basically means is there's a 25 pixel gap between the tallest and the lowest point of the star. That would be my result. If I were to make the second radius smaller, like that, that would mean actually now there's a 40 pixel distance between the top, from the tallest to the lowest point. And so my star looks a little pointier now. If I were to make these closer to each other, if I made this 35, now there's only a 15 pixel difference from the top to the lowest point. And so my star looks a little bit more bulbous. Okay. So you can play around with that to see, how exactly you want your multi-sided shape to be. All right, the last thing, I don't really want to talk about this, but I'm going to because it's there, is this thing called the flare tool. You really shouldn't use this because it's not really vector based, but I'll explain what it is. What a lens flare is when you have a camera, your camera has a lens made of glass, and that piece of glass is curved, okay? It's a, curved piece of glass. And what happens is when you point your lens at a very bright source, like the sun or like a light source, like a lamp or something like that, you actually get the rays of light bouncing off of the glass itself. Kind of like how you get, how there's shine on windows, right? Because the light source is bouncing off of it. It's the same idea, except it's a lens. So what happens is the light bounces off of the lens and goes into the camera, and you get this lens flare. Okay. Looks like this. All right. Now, in real life, you have never seen a lens flare from your own eyes. And the reason for that is our eyes in real are not made of glass. So when light goes into our eyes, our corneas, it doesn't bounce off of any glass. So therefore, there's no lens flare. Lens flares really only exist inside of cameras, okay, or video cameras. So here, like we can see this because this is a camera that's recording this guy or whatever it is. Like here, we're recording this person and like there's a lens flare from where this, we're pointing it at the light source, which is the sun in this case. The sun is bouncing off of uh the camera, blah, 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 and that's what's causing this. But you yourself, you've never seen lens flares in your own eye. They don't exist. Okay. Now, lens flares make sense in raster programs like Photoshop and Photopea because essentially you're dealing with photographs, right? Digital photos are have lens flare or can have lens flares in them. Illustrator isn't really meant to have them because they're really meant to be vectors. There's no such thing as you don't record images as vectors, at least not defaultly. So that wouldn't doesn't really make any sense as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, that's my little rant there. If I click and drag, I can make a lens flare as such. Okay. If you want more preciseness, you can click and just click once as opposed to clicking and dragging. Oops, where's my options? There we go. I'm not going to go through everything here, but the center is is the center of your lens flare. So like the bigger the center, you can see how bigger it makes that. Brightness is like how physically bright the center is here. And the rays, these are the rays that are coming off. So if I like lower the number of rays, you can see it literally lowers the number of light coming out, or I can raise the number of rays. In terms of rings, like these are the rings. You can say how big you want them to be. This is your halo. This is a bigger halo or a smaller halo. So once again, I don't really recommend doing this, but if you want to know what these are and how to use them, this is how, you can use them there. Okay. All right. I want you guys to try that out. That was exercise 11, 12, and 13, please. Okay.